Jennifer already set the stage kind of on our theme for our speakers. Our next speaker is Kristine Morris. She's the Assistant Deputy Secretary for Ecosystem Restoration for Florida Department of Environmental Protection. And she will be speaking on innovative solutions in water supply. The purpose is to share an overview of water demands in Florida and how traditional and non-traditional sources are used to meet our water needs while still protecting natural resources. And this relates to the hydrological restoration action plan, or action number 2, increase fresh surface water and groundwater availability to support healthy ecosystems. And we have Kristine joining us online. And you can take it away. Thank you for joining us today.
Good morning. Can you all hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Wonderful. All right. All right, let me see. Okay, I can see the slide now. So yes, as she said, good morning. My name is Kristine Morris. I'm with FDEP. I just wanted to come and speak to you all about some of the innovative solutions that we're looking at in water supply. And I'm going to go a little bit deeper into the context of why we need certain types of water supply development. Next slide. So I wanted to start with the context about who are Florida's water users. And in a few slides, I'll go through each of the water withdrawal sectors. But the users of water are our 23 million citizens, 143 million visitors, and 9.7 million acres of agriculture. Water use in Florida is regulated by the state's 5 water management districts, which were created in 1972. These boundaries were designed to reflect surface water boundaries, which is most evident in that part of South Florida that comes up the Kissimmee River into the center of the state. In order to manage these water resources, we require that the water management districts evaluate their water supplies every 5 years through the regional water supply planning process. Next slide. So as part of that regional water supply planning process, what they are asked to do is to identify if there are any water constraints where the existing sources of water are not adequate to supply water for both the existing water users as well as all future water users, and at the same time, sustain the water resources themselves and their related natural systems. That planning period is a 20-year planning period, and these plans are updated every 5 years. We do these projections so that we can plan for the future. It can take years to develop a water supply, even a traditional water supply. And for something a little bit more complicated, it can take a decade or more. So by planning for these 20 years in advance, we can assure that we have available supplies when we need them. In those plans, we identify not only the water use projection, meaning how much water we expect to need, but we identify the sources of water that may be available to meet that water need as well. Next slide. The estimated statewide 2020 water use was about 6.3 billion gallons of water in the whole state of Florida. The statewide 2040 water demand projection is set to be 7.2 billion gallons of water a day, which is a 14% growth. Over that same time period, Florida was expected to grow by about 24%. So as you can see, public supply, which is the water you receive from utilities, is both the largest water user and the one projected to grow the most. I will note that this number is not what we actually expect to withdraw. That's not really what a projection is. This is the amount of water that we expect to need. We may meet that need with a number of sources, and we can curb that increase in water use through the implementation of water conservation. Next slide. To put that in perspective, this is the state's historic water use. I wanted to show you our historic water use, and this is data compiled by USGS since 1970. The water management districts have worked with USGS for decades to help compile these figures, which what they show is a 1-year estimated snapshot for water use for that particular year. So even though you see some up and downs here every 5 years, know that the in-between years also are going up and down based off of whatever factors might be occurring that year. Note that this is also only freshwater withdrawals, and yeah, it can be affected in those single year snapshots by things like rainfall, et cetera. So in 1970, at the start of the data collection in Florida, which is actually 2 years prior to when the state had a water use permitting program, the state was estimated to have freshwater withdrawals of 5.6 billion gallons of water a day. And 5 years later, it was a billion gallons more. It peaked in 2000 with an estimated water withdrawal of 8.2 billion gallons of water. And the implementation of water conservation measures and alternative sources has made this downward slope that you've seen a reality. So next slide. So I wanted to talk about some of these things that can influence water use, and obviously in the context of today's drier conditions. So this is the drought monitor data for the past 26 years. So I think that the initial date is January 2000. And what this graph shows is the severity of drought since 2000. This is a statewide glance. So the darker the color, the worse the drought. The higher the peak, the larger percent of Florida is in drought. So I like this graph because it does show how widespread and how severe a drought may be. But I do want to acknowledge that even if you are in the 10% of Florida in a drought, if that is your 10%, you are going to be feeling the effects of a drought, even if the rest of the state is not. So again, I just want to give the context of what this data represents and what it necessarily doesn't, because it's not really intended to show a local scale. So in Florida, we really haven't had one of these kind of widespread, meaning all of Florida, kind of persistent droughts since about 2000. However, before that, it was, a fairly regular occurrence. We had a very severe drought in the 2000-2001 timeframe. There was a 2007 drought, and then again in 2011 and 12. We do know we live in Florida, the rains will come. But it also does take time after rain comes to replenish our water storage. So I wanted to talk briefly about the difference between drought, which is largely a meteorological effect, and water shortage, which is more about the evaluation of a water supply within the system. For your all's region, this can include an evaluation of reservoirs, aquifer levels, riverine flows, and more. And when you are in a water shortage situation, or when anyone's in a water shortage situation, the water management districts do have the authority to issue water shortage orders. These typically initiate as voluntary orders or warnings, and then they can become mandatory. Next slide. So within that context, I wanted to touch on some of the types of water supplies that can help both meet demands and help us stretch our supplies in dry weather conditions. Starting with traditional sources, this is mostly your fresh groundwater for most of the state, although there is a lot more surface water withdrawal down in the southern areas of the state. And I wanted to kind of clarify, a lot of people, when I say the word constraint, when it comes to our traditional sources in particular, or groundwater in particular, they think that the aquifer is running out of water. And that's not really accurate. Our aquifer system continues to provide substantial quantities of water and offers storage of unparalleled volume. However, when I say it may be constrained, it needs to support both water users and the natural system. And so there are times where a certain source may be constrained where it cannot support further withdrawals. So next on this list is reclaimed water. Reuse is the number one alternative water supply source in Florida. From our 2004 reuse inventory that DEP puts out, nearly 1 billion gallons of water a day was beneficially reused last year. Or actually 2024 would be 2 years ago now. I can't believe it's May 2026. I'm going to talk a little bit more about brackish water in depth, and as well as actually seawater. But this is somewhat of a newer source, not because it's new, but because it's becoming more widespread. And like I said, I'm going to go into that a little bit more in depth in a bit. There are also reservoirs and other surface waters that are still widely used throughout the state. Aquifer recharge gives us the ability to credit the system, even as we have groundwater withdrawals, and that allows the aquifer to continue to support the ecology and hydrology of the area while also providing for water supply. And then there's water conservation, and I'm going to go in depth about that as well to talk about how important water conservation is when you talk about meeting your future water demands. Next slide. So this is an example of a type of water supply that we're seeing in some areas of the state, and it's kind of under what I'm calling under the header of One Water. That was kind of a branding of these types of projects. I do believe the next speaker is going to talk about wetlands as well, so I'm not going to go super in depth. But this one, you might be able to tell from the shape of this wetland. This is in Gainesville, and yes, that is a gator's head. This is a 264-acre wetland park that was part of a large-scale restoration effort. So this project was built to rehydrate more than 1,300 acres of Paynes Prairie. It does include highly treated reclaimed water as well as stormwater. And then that is further treated in this gator-shaped wetland. It has become a thriving habitat of birds, butterflies, alligators, and my inner horse girl is so happy to hear that they've even reported Florida cracker horses. The park also features more than 3.5 miles of crushed gravel and trails and boardwalks. So there's some viewing platforms, educational signs. As you can imagine, birders absolutely love it out there, and they have welcomed about 80,000 visitors annually to this park. So one of the reasons I wanted to highlight this is because of how holistic this project was. It rehydrates Paynes Prairie, it recharges the Floridan aquifer. It offers this amazing community amenity that is very popular. And so it's offering multiple benefits with one project that is really serving its community at this point. The other reason I really liked this project is it's kind of an example of what it takes to bring something like this together. They had to bring together local governments, state agencies, nonprofits, different landowners, et cetera. And when you have to bring all of that together, it's very hard. I'm sure, as you guys you guys work with these types of entities, and even within your all's organization, bringing people together is not easy. Getting people to agree to take action on something of this scale is not easy. And so it's really impressive when it does come together and it starts to provide the benefit that you all kind of collectively envisioned at the beginning. So that was one example I wanted to kind of show is something that's we're seeing, kind of really these thoughtful projects that are achieving multiple benefits all simultaneously. Next slide. The second project I wanted to hit on was desalination, and I'm actually going to have a couple slides on desalination in general, but this one is specifically about seawater desalination. So in a drought, this becomes one of the most alluring alternative water supply types because rainfall or no, there is always going to be plenty of seawater. So I first wanted to talk about how seawater becomes potable. You start with a pretreatment process that will remove the constituents that come in with the seawater itself. And after that treatment occurs, the seawater is treated using something called reverse osmosis, where very high pressure forces the seawater through membranes, and that will separate the fresh water from the minerals, including essentially the salt. The size of each RO membrane, I found this incredible. So that each membrane pore is about 0.001 microns, which is 1/100,000th the diameter of the human hair. So what is left behind is a concentrate that must be properly disposed of, and on the other side is fresh water. Currently, there is exactly one seawater desal plant in Florida that is used to meet demands, and that is Tampa Bay Water's plant. There are two other smaller facilities in the Florida Keys. Those are used for emergency backup purposes, so they're not used to meet kind of daily demands. Nationwide, as of 2018, when Congress last published a count, there were only 13 of these facilities in the entire United States. And there's not a ton more worldwide, and most of those are in the Middle East for desert reasons. So why is this not more widespread? Well, yes, it is a drought-proof source, but it can't, you really do want to see a lot of diversity in your water supply. And this one tends to be one of the more expensive types of water to be developed and to operate. And so for those reasons, there is only currently this one in the state, and not many others like it. I think the largest one is out in California. It's about double the size of Tampa Bay Waters. But for the most part, we're kind of on the smaller side compared to what you see out in the Middle East, where they do much larger facilities. Next slide. So there is another type of desal, and that is brackish water, brackish groundwater, typically. But before I get into that, I wanted to make sure I share a little bit about our aquifer systems. And the reason I wanted to do that is because we are hydrologically and geographically unique throughout the state. And what is available as a water supply to one entity may be completely unavailable to another. And so brackish water is kind of one of those that kind of fits that bill. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about aquifer systems first. So Florida does have a number of aquifer systems that provide both fresh and brackish water sources. And this illustration sets forth some of those distinct aquifer systems, like the Biscayne Aquifer in Southeast Florida and the Sand and Gravel Aquifer in the Northwest Florida. There are also intermediate and surficial aquifers throughout the state. And then there's the Floridan Aquifer, which is one of the most productive aquifer systems in the world. We are exceptionally lucky to have this system covering all of the state of Florida. It covers a good part of the state of Georgia, and extends into Alabama and South Carolina as well. Most of the state's drinking water comes from this aquifer. It, however, is brackish in some areas, including parts of South Florida. Further north, and you can kind of see this in that first map at the top, it is unconfined, which is essentially where there is no intermediate or surficial aquifer. When you withdraw water there, you are tapping into the Floridan aquifer. And for maybe obvious reasons, this is where you also see a lot of springs. In other areas, such as parts of the Central Florida Water Initiative area, there are confined layers within the Floridan aquifer. So we have a lower Floridan aquifer available there. Parts of it are fresh and parts of it are brackish. And this aquifer, because it is confined for example, in that area of Central Florida, it does have water available, even though the upper Floridan does not necessarily, the upper Floridan is constrained in that area. So I present all of this to say that our aquifer system is unique and it is geographically fixed. And again, what may be available in one area of the state may not be available in another. And so that has to be thought of and developed in those regional water supply plans that I mentioned, to look at what sources of water are available to water users to meet their future needs. Next slide. So brackish water. Brackish water is treated similarly to seawater in that it uses reverse osmosis. However, there are very big differences between brackish water and seawater. And for context, the chloride concentration of fresh water is generally around the 250 or less mark. Brackish water tends to be about 250 chloride concentration of milligrams per liter. Brackish water is between 500 to 10,000. 10,000 tends to be quite salty. And then seawater starts really at 19,000, but that's kind of On the lower end, it can go up to 35,000 milligrams per liter. So it is orders of magnitude fresher than seawater. Is what I'm trying to convey there. Brackish water, and we'll see brackish water sometimes at 1,000 milligrams per liter of fluoride concentration. And even that does require reverse osmosis, but it is just significantly cheaper to remove that as compared to seawater. So we do see a little bit more brackish water treatment. So one of those examples is the Polk Regional Water Cooperative. Sorry, last slide. Ooh, nope, back two. There you go. So one of those examples is the Polk Regional Water Cooperative. This was made up of 15 member governments, and they are currently developing 2 lower Floridan well fields using brackish water in the Central Florida Water Initiative area. This is an area where I mentioned, sorry about that. This is an area I mentioned before where there are constraints, and actually those are constraints are set now by rule for the upper Floridan aquifer, but where there is confinement, they are able to tap into the lower Floridan aquifer where there are available water supplies. What's remarkable again, and I kind of just want to stress this, is you have a lot of entities looking to or able to work together, and that has kind of led to the development of these well fields and the ability to meet those future needs of those entities. And that well field is not alone in South Florida Water Management District. They are tapping the Floridan, and I think theirs is the upper Floridan, where it's a little bit brackish. And they have 41 brackish water facilities that I saw reported as of 2024. So next slide. And so the last example, like a specific example I want to provide is on water conservation. And there's sometimes the misconception that water conservation is small, that it can't really achieve that much, that it's somewhat of a feel-good item that doesn't really move the needle, and that really could not be further from the truth. We think that because when we think about water conservation in our own homes individually, we take shorter showers, or we reduce our irrigation, and our individual water use may go down a little. When you multiply that by the number of individuals implementing those practices, it can be staggering how much water can be achieved. And I have a couple more slides to illustrate that in a moment. So I wanted to include it here because any organization can promote water conservation. It is a strategy that needs to be thoughtful, needs to be proactive to achieve specific long-term goals. It almost always costs significantly less than developing a new water supply. And in times of drought, water conservation practices have 2 benefits. One, they have helped keep water in storage, which makes us able to meet our needs for longer during those dry weather conditions. So we're a little bit more resilient. And 2, they are already in place when you need to reduce water use during a drought. So you're not trying to get people to implement a new practice. They're already implementing that practice. They already have the fixtures in place in their home. They've repaired their toilet so it no longer leaks. They've gone to a low flow shower head, etc. So because of water conservation, it is exceptionally beneficial to have those in place year round so that you can be more resilient and have the devices in place so that you can stretch your supplies in dry weather conditions. The other thing is that, utilities and other organizations can learn from one another to implement both proven success methods while also, turning to innovative solutions. And we are seeing a lot more innovation in this space as it relates to smart devices. We all kind of are familiar now with like a Nest, where you can change your air conditioning temperature from your phone. We're starting to see that now for irrigation systems that are able to look at the weather and other types of smart devices as well. So it's really kind of exciting, some of the technology that's coming online that will also help us achieve our water conservation goals. Next slide. So the illustration I wanted to provide comes from Tampa Bay Water. They implement a Tampa Bay WaterWise program. And in 6 years, they have saved 1.1 million gallons of water a day, or reduced their need for water by 1.1 million gallons of water, which is remarkable. They have implemented a targeted approach where they look at multifamily dwellings, and that has accounted for about 75% of that savings. And so the graph on the right comes, I was able to get it with permission from Amelia Brown at Tampa Bay Water from a presentation I saw her give last winter. So this was a project that they implemented at an assisted living facility. Actually, they implemented it at 3 different facilities. And what they did is they installed a retrofit into an existing toilet system. So they didn't have to replace the entire toilet. They were able to install this retrofit device. And that device did 2 things. First, if a toilet was leaking, it would shut off the water. So that's really good for landlords who's, in an assisted living facility may not get the report that there is a leak until it is, unfortunately in a flood. Second, it reduces the gallons per flush by about half. And at this facility, the majority of the toilets were 1.6 gallons per flush. And so they were able to install these devices at 3 facilities and saw actual reductions, monitored actual reductions of water use of 46%, 69%, and 8% at these different facilities. The 8% was a little lower simply because they had a lower gallon per flush toilet already installed, but I would take an 8% reduction across the board all day long. So really 3 very successful efforts at these facilities. And so this is what I mean when I say water conservation is not a feel-good item. You multiply this by the number of entities that can implement measures like this, and you can achieve massive, massive reductions in water use. And next slide. We have seen that, right? So this is our per capita water use. So the dashed line is population. We have seen an increase in population, throughout our history, since the 1970s, and we have seen a decline in per capita water use. This is the same USGS data that I showed earlier. So you can kind of see in 2000, from on, we've kind of seen this reduction in per capita water use. I will note also, you'll probably notice it stops in 2015. We are awaiting USGS's 2020 report. They tend to get them out about 5-6 years later. So I expect the 2020 data to be released soon, but we don't have that yet. So I apologize for the out-of-date data there, but we are looking forward to getting 2020 in there as well to see how that year performed. And so finally, next slide. This is really just a plug. It's not quite related directly, but I wanted to quickly hit up our grants. This is asked for by most of our folks. So we don't yet have our grant programs for this year, but one of the grant programs we've had the past several years is the Alternative Water Supply Grant. The types of projects I've talked about today are eligible project types, including the water conservation. And so once we get a budget that is signed by the governor, we do post all of our grant opportunities on that website at the top, floridadep.gov/funding. And so we put every funding source that we get, that's in every subject area, water, waste, everything. When it comes time to do the funding itself, we open a grants portal on protectingfloridatogether.gov/grants. People can submit to sign up for alerts so that they will be notified when that is posted. That will open July 1st. Entities can download a Word version of the application within their organization for drafting purposes. And we just ask that they submit before the deadline, because when that deadline hits, we pull the button off the website and no applications can be submitted after that time. So I just wanted to give that small plug before I concluded. And with that, I will turn it over and see if you have any questions for me.
Thank you so much. Any questions for Kristine? Yeah.
Just curious, Kristine, just as a ballpark, how long would it take from rainfall and wetland storage for that water to actually go into the fluoride and aquifer?
So it's going to vary. There are areas of this state that are like a sponge. You put water on the ground and it will go into the Floridan. Really, those kind of springs areas up north, they're very transmissive. The aquifer is, and the Floridan is at the very top. It depending on the formations under an area, you might see some delay. That said, beyond that, and even in those really transmissive areas up north, it can take time after the rains begin to see a kind of the rebound of water storage. And so if you think of it, the aquifer is not different in some ways than a surface reservoir, right? So after the rains come, you don't go, oh, we got rain, the reservoir's full again. It can take time for that to get back to, whatever your typical stage might be for it. And that can happen for the aquifer as well. So even after rains, it's important to communicate to the public that water conservation practices may still be needed as we achieve that. I also want to state that drought, just like, higher rainfall events, is part of the typical hydrologic condition. And so it's not necessarily, independently harmful. Drought can be very beneficial ecologically in some areas. It can also just, unfortunately, especially when it's persistent and widespread, it can cause, certain impacts that we try to manage and prevent, any sort of enduring harm.
Thank you.
Chris, go ahead.
Thank you for the presentation, Kristine. You may already be getting these kind of questions, but how does something like the development of like data centers and water usage associated with that fit into y'all's water permit program? And if you haven't developed that yet, is that something in process with DEP, or is that kind of outside of your wheelhouse?
So water use permitting is done by the water management districts. So DEP does not issue water use permits themselves. Data centers are, obviously, a hot topic. I did see that the governor has signed Senate Bill 484, which does relate to data centers. So that might be something to look at. I thought I might get this question, so I kind of looked up really quickly the status of that, but I don't really have a lot of background information on specifically, how that would be implemented. But I think there are existing permitting processes in place that are designed to receive a water use permit, you have to meet what we call the three-part test. And then within that three-part test, there are a number of enumerated conditions for permit issuance. But the three-part test is that the use of water must be reasonable, beneficial, which means it needs to have a purpose. It can't be wasteful, et cetera. That it can't impact other existing legal users. And it has to be consistent with the public interest. One of those reasonable, beneficial criteria is that it not cause harm to the water resources of the area. And so those are like generally permitting conditions that are in place under the statute and in each of the water management districts rules. And each of the districts has adopted, the criteria to implement that permitting process.
Thank you.
I guess on that note, you mentioned the regional water supply plans are required when there's not existing adequate water supply or for future. Is this something the water management districts do as well? Oh, and are they in place? Sorry, I have a water management district person answering.
Yeah. We represent two water management districts here in the room. Yes, we do regional water supply plans. It's a 20-year outlook and they're updated every 5 years. And so for folks, some of the folks in the room, there are areas, the Central Florida Water Initiative area is projected to not meet demand in that 20-year period. And so there's an effort between the multiple water management districts, the local municipalities, Polk was mentioned, definitely plays a part, but plays a part in that as well. How are we going to meet that demand? So looking at the different options. And yeah, so we do that. They refresh those pretty frequently on a 5-year basis, looking 20 years out.
Does that incorporate MFLs too for the estuaries?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, they're taking into account to see what's available. And with that 20-year outlook, they're projecting out the water needs, but that can change. It's just why they're refreshed every 5 years, because ag can change, developments change. So trying to keep that in line and ensuring that those needs are going to be met well into the future.
And I'll note a lot of those projections do not that water conservation is kind of not baked into the projection itself. It is kind of deducted on the back end. So you'll see a growth pattern that you are trying to curb through the implementation of water conservation methods. And there's always some water conservation that is achieved through what we call passive conservation, meaning there's new requirements for toilets. You can't install the big, water guzzling toilets anymore. They're just not even available. So you'll see that turnover naturally. So we do know that there's going to be water savings on top of the projections that we have. So I just wanted to clarify that, because sometimes people see the large number at the end and they say, this is what we're going to be at. And the answer is no, we're going to reduce that number, and then we're going to meet portions of it with alternative sources. So it doesn't have to all, in fact, it will not all be met with, for example, fresh groundwater. And in the CFWI, we've kind of identified that as a constrained system. Again, that doesn't mean that the aquifer is empty or that it's run out. It means that we are going to develop alternative sources in order to meet any future growth demands.
And one more thought on that too. Just want to give a plug for the Florida Water Star program. So some of the areas in the CFWI have proactively adopted that. So for new development to meet these additional requirements versus, what a basic, like you're mentioning the passive, Kristine's mentioning the passive, we don't have 6 gallon per flush toilets even available on the market anymore. So there's going to be a reduction there. But in addition to that, there's soil moisture sensors and things that can be implemented, especially on the outside. And so with these requirements, the developers are adopted into code. These developers are required to implement these additional practices. So also creating a reduction there too. So just want to mention that because those communities are really being proactive about meeting them.
What was the name of that group you just mentioned?
Florida Water Star. Florida Water Star.
Thank you.
Florida Water Star.
Quick question about that. So do you see that most municipalities incorporate that into like the land development code, or do they require development gets a Florida Green Building certification, which includes something like that? Is there a preferred method for the district, or how do you guys?
Well, I think it's the program itself, and it's outside. We do support it and have training programs for the installers, like sprinklers and some of the outdoor things, to be aware of the different heads and all of that to meet these requirements. And so it's really new development is the focus. There is a retro program. It's very difficult to meet. The last time I looked into it. So I think that what the communities have done is to say, we're going to adopt this into ordinance to make this a requirement for the new development. And so to meet that. So what happens is they can apply, and there's a rebate program associated with it to make it attractive for the developers, that essentially the extra money they're spending on these fixtures is reduced a bit, and so that they can recoup some of that cost. But they get a certification and some literature for the new homeowners, so it's also a selling point for those developments. So they don't have to do anything except apply for the program, and then those certified inspectors will come out and ensure that it's meeting, all the requirements to get the certification. So that's kind of how the program works. I think that answers your question, Will.
So it's sort of the same process as the Florida Green Building certification. That's part of it, and maybe the same, send somebody out there to look at it, so. Fort Myers is currently looking at which option we go with, if we're gonna incorporate that, so I wanted to clarify if you guys sort of tie it all into one, or if it's totally separate. So-
Yeah, it's separate. We're just looking at the water conservation in our cases.
Thank you.
Sure.
I think we have to move on to our next speaker. Thank you, Kristine, for joining us today.